Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne, and today with my guest, Susan Saunders. Susan is a health coach and author. She coaches post-menopausal women around the world to build better brain health, reduce their dementia risk, and age well. She's co-founder of the Age Well Project platform and co-author of the best-selling book with the same name. She's author of the Age Well Plan, and her new book, The Power Decade: How to Thrive After Menopause, will be published worldwide on April 27th, which will be just around the corner from when this gets published. Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today. As you know, I'm putting together a series of episodes that focus on topics like aging and taking care of the elderly and dementia. And as I was doing my research, I ran across your work and the expertise you have. And I definitely knew I wanted to bring you into this series of work. But before we kind of dive into your expertise and kind of what you do day to day, can you give us a little background on the life events that led you here?
Yes, of course. Yes. And thank you so much for inviting me onto the podcast, Marianne. I'm really honored to join you. Yes. So my interest in reducing dementia risk, my interest in aging well, grew out of my own personal family experience. When I was 36, I had a toddler and a newborn. I was working full time, and then my mum was diagnosed with dementia. So that was an enormous shock. I really had no idea what to do. I was very young to be handling that diagnosis, and I had a lot on my plate already. So becoming a carer for her, as I did, was a huge learning curve. And what made it more poignant for me was that as a teenager, I had watched my mum care for her mum, who also had dementia. So I could see a kind of pattern developing here, and I just started to think, what can I do to reduce my own risk? What can I do to reduce the likelihood that my own daughters won't be in the situation that I was in and that my mother was in? It's a familiar story. And now I'm in my mid-50s and I'm coaching women from 50 plus. Many of them are dealing with a similar situation. What was unusual for me was that I was in my mid-30s. I was pretty young to be handling that. I mean, it's not unusual, but it was pretty young. So that was the wake-up call. That set me on the journey to thinking, what can I do to look after my own brain?
Well, I'm so sorry, first of all, that you went through that because, like you said, it's not that uncommon for 50s-ish to be dealing with that in your 30s and with two small children. Yeah. Gosh, you had a lot going on. So I'm sure that was a difficult time for you, but thankfully you were able to react to it and gain the knowledge you needed to go forward. And now here you are sharing it with everybody else. So I'm thankful for that. So on that note, we do have a lot of women in the group who have been on a wellness journey, trying to get healthier and do some things just in general. And so I know that one of the things that you talk about is sort of what healthy eating looks like and some of the foods that are known to support aging well. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that and share that with the group.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting when it comes to talking about food and aging well and reducing dementia risk, because often the first thing I start talking about with clients is not eating, by which I mean, which I think is kind of a bit unfair, but by which I mean time restricted eating. Some people talk about intermittent fasting, but I think having a period in each 24 hours in which we don't eat, which is longer than just the time that we're asleep, is really important, because that gives our bodies time to rest and digest, which is really, really important, and time to repair. As we get older, our bodies need more time to repair, and digestion is hard work. It's a big ask of our bodies all the time. So if we give them a bit of time when they're not doing that, then they get time to repair, then they get time to do the things that we need them to do. So with my client, we start with, can you manage a 12-hour non-eating window? So most of that you're asleep for. Does that mean eating a little earlier in the evening? Does that mean having breakfast a bit later? How can you start to open out that window? And I think that's a really simple protocol that the majority of people can follow. Not everybody. People who have a history of disordered eating, people who are really struggling with menopause symptoms, then maybe leaving breakfast a bit later could be not the right thing to be doing. But it's a good starting point for a lot of people. It's quite manageable, and it's not about, you've got to buy this, you've got to buy that, you've got to try this. It's just like, just don't eat for a little bit. You're going to eat. It's not about diet. It's not like, hey, you've got to follow this diet, which I absolutely hate. I think that's so wrong. I think we should be thinking about the great benefits that food can bring us, the great health benefits, and seeing food as a positive thing. And I think very often as women, as older women, we have spent so long fighting a battle with food. It is very difficult to see it as a positive thing. I see you nodding, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Sort of my phrase of the month is unlearning, right? Every time something comes up, I go back to, and of course I didn't create that saying, but it is a time of unlearning, I think, in our 50s and 60s. We're doing discovery also, but there's an unlearning period there where we're trying to unwind all the, messaging that went on for years and got implanted in our heads. And now's the time to let it go. I want to go back to your 12 hours because I know just from, lots of people in the group that I interact with, and that there's all of these opinions about the intermittent fasting time period. And I think 12 hours is really doable for most people. Like you said, there's some health concerns or specific reasons why it wouldn't work. But for the large majority, 12 hours isn't that bad. Like that should be doable, right? Yes. Have you seen research that 12 hours is sort of the spot where it kind of breaks us over that hump and really see the benefits of it?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of research around that. 12 hours is a really good starting point. I think if you can push it a little bit further, then you get more benefits. But 14 is really good. I mean, I think some of these kind of really hardcore 1 meal a day type diets are not good, particularly for women. And I don't think they're great for our bodies. But I think, 12 to 14 hours of fasting, there's a lot of research that backs that up as being beneficial for the body. It gives time for some healing. It gives some time for our bodies to kind of digest the gunk that's kind of floating around, and it has a beneficial effect.
So let's go back to your comment about looking for the positives in our diet and food. So are there standout food recommendations that you talk to your clients about that give a really big bang for the buck, if you will, for the caloric intake, and do the benefit really stand out in certain foods?
Yes. I think, well, two things. One, let's talk generally, and then there are a couple of specifics, but generally, I find none of my clients are getting enough protein. Again, I think my clients are all women. As women, it's kind of, we sort of think, maybe if I just have some bread and some vegetables, some salad, I'll be okay. And it's actually, we're missing out on the protein, and that is so important for our bodies as we age. And we do some maths. There's an equation that we start with. It's getting enough protein. It's working out what that is and putting protein back kind of on the center of the plate, as it were. And along with that, and getting enough vegetables, getting lots of fibrous vegetables, lovely green leafy vegetables, brightly colored vegetables. I say to my clients, when you're meal planning, start with the vegetables first, because we tend to think of them as a side dish. And if you start by thinking, well, okay, which vegetables am I going to eat today? Then you add in the other things. And then what vegetables am I going to have? What protein am I going to have? And then we add in some fat. And that is another thing that I find women in midlife often struggle with, is eating fat. We are a generation of women who were told we should be eating low fat, and fat is incredibly important for our health. It's important for our joints and our muscles and everything else, and it's particularly important for our brains. Our brains are balls of fat and water, and if we're not giving them those things, they don't function as well. And so getting enough healthy fats, good fats, unprocessed fats like nuts and avocado and olive oil, those sort of things, it's really important. And we've just fed literally this lie for so many years that fat would make us fat and we shouldn't eat it. And one of my clients said to me, oh, my husband really likes avocados, and I watch him eat some avocado and think, well, I could never do that. And it's like, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. So it goes back to how we kind of unlearn and relearn what we think we know about food, what we've been told for so long.
I do agree that messaging with, everything, fat-free dairy products, fat-free everything, right? And yeah, I think making sure we have some every day, that's how we balance it all out, right?
Yeah.
And how we make sure that our body is getting enough. But I do think it's an unlearning. I do think we've been programmed not to.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And when it comes to specifics, there's some really interesting research around a kind of brain boosting combination of foods, of nutrients, which can really help support the structure of our brain cells, making sure that we get choline, a nutrient that we find in eggs and beans and nuts, making sure that we get DHA, which is a omega-3 fatty acid, find particularly in fatty fish, oily fish like salmon, mackerel, that kind of thing, and B vitamins as well, which make this whole process work so that we can build a strong wall to our brain cells, essentially. So those are foods that work well together. Really important that we're getting enough B vitamins, particularly folate, which is vitamin B9. It seems to be protective of the brain. Those things are all working together. So it's important that we think, are we getting enough of these specific nutrients when we're thinking broadly about getting lots of vegetables, getting protein, getting fats, and are we getting these specific things? Are we getting our B vitamins? Are we getting omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA? And are we getting choline, which seems to be a really important nutrient for the brain?
So on that thought process, let's move away from the actual food for a minute. Tell me your thoughts around supplementation. So vitamins or even other supplements. Like, what do you think about that? What is your experience with that?
It's a really tricky one, to be honest with you, Marianne. I think that supplements are supplemental. That, the clues in the name, but it is very difficult for us to get a well-balanced diet. We know that the soil that our vegetables are grown in is depleted. We know that foods are not as nutrient rich as they would have been even 50 years ago. So I think it's a question of looking at what is important and thinking, where do I add in? If someone doesn't eat fish, for example, then taking an omega-3 supplement, I think, is important. I think we all need to be taking vitamin D, unless you live in California or Florida. Certainly here in the UK where I am, we don't get enough daylight to make the vitamin D that we need. We don't get enough sunshine. So we need to make sure that we get that as a supplement. So there was some interesting research recently about taking a multivitamin. Very, very simple piece of research. And I've always sort of thought that multivitamins are a bit of a waste, but a study came out at the beginning of this year linked taking a multivitamin for 3 years with better cognition, better memory, and decline in issues that is a possible predictor of Alzheimer's. So it's important to do all we can to preserve brain function. So, taking a multivitamin ticks a lot of boxes. You're going to get your B vitamins. You won't get omega-3 from a regular multivitamin, but it's worth thinking, well, why not just take a multivitamin? The research is pretty robust. It was an American study, and the supplement, the multivitamin they took, was called Centrum Silver, which we don't have in the UK, though we have something similar. But that's quite interesting research. So ultimately, supplements are a good insurance policy.
I too think that, no matter how well we eat, we're not going to get everything in the right combination. So I would agree with that. I really like that study. I actually had heard you talk about that. And one of the things that I loved about it was hearing that was a pretty easy to get and low cost vitamin brand here in the US, Centrum, right? There's a lot of stuff out there about buying these high cost vitamins and supplements. And I think, I'm not going to name any, but people can certainly get sucked into needing to spend a whole bunch of money to try to get that stuff. And I don't know if I buy in on that. So I'm really glad to hear that there was some actual scientific backing that just a general, good quality, but known brand, but really low cost vitamin can do the job.
Yes. Yeah, I think so, because I think before you know where you are, you can spend hundreds of dollars a month on any kind of supplements. And there are so many now that are specifically marketed for, this is going to make your brain better. You're going to help with your bones. This is going to help you age well, all these things. And as you say, the fact that just a regular kind of very freely available for a few pounds supplement has been researched in this way is kind of reassuring. And I suspect it worked because it is an insurance policy, because it's broad spectrum.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of filled in the gaps for people.
Yeah. Good to know, though. I do think, like anything else, people get immobilized by too much information, like not knowing what to do because they're hearing all the marketing spin on everything. So I really like that you can know that it's pretty easy to just grab something readily off the shelf and be feeling pretty confident that you're doing at least, a little something there to, to help ensure. So let's move away from the food and the vitamins and supplements for a minute, because I think there's other things we can do in our daily practices to help keep the brain functioning well, to help keep dementia at bay, or maybe even slow it down. I'm not sure. That was sort of a question, but give us some ideas about things that you talk to your clients about you've run across in your research. And I think some of them are pretty simple, easy to do, I guess, in concept. I don't know about in practice, but give me some thoughts on some daily practices or things we can do in general.
I always say to people, the most important thing, the first thing, is putting your brain first. Again, we're talking about learning and unlearning. We're so conditioned to think about our weight and our looks and all this kind of things. But what is more important? Our brains are just great, big, beautiful things. And we want to look after them. We want to be intentional about how we care for them and ask ourselves, is this thing I'm going to do good or bad for my brain? So I think that's the first thing. It's making that shift, that mental shift, to keep our brains front of mind, to think about what they need, how do we nurture them. And the other thing I think to remember generally is that dementia is a condition of midlife that presents in older age. So the earlier we can start, the better when it comes to looking after our brains. A couple of new studies in the last few weeks have looked at reducing dementia risk in large cohorts. One published today from the US looked at women from sort of mid-50s to mid-70s and found it's things we know, it's being active, it's having a good diet, maintaining a healthy weight, not smoking, keeping an eye on blood pressure, cholesterol, low blood sugar, all those things. So I think actually, first of all, before we think about the daily things, it's just being aware of what's going on with our health, taking ownership of that, keeping a track of our numbers. If we go to the doctors and we are given information about cholesterol levels or blood sugar, keep a record of that. Be aware of what's happening in your body and what you need to do. I think broadly, that's really, really important. But then other things, for me, obviously movement is very important. Strength training, building muscle, that's just so important. We don't really know why, but we know that muscle, particularly in the legs, is linked to better cognition. Something about having muscle and using that muscle seems to fire off a process in the brain that keeps our cognition strong. Maybe related to the production of a substance called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like Miracle-Gro for the brain. And we can help produce that by building muscle. We can help produce that by having that fasting window we were talking about earlier, and also by doing vigorous exercise. We start to produce it pretty quickly, actually, within, I think, 6 minutes of any form of vigorous exercise. We're producing more of that stuff. So muscle, really important. Sleep. And sleep is such a difficult topic because whenever I raise it, someone will say, I haven't slept for 20 years. But I think, which is awful. And that is, chronic insomnia needs support from a medical team. But I think if you're someone who doesn't prioritize sleep, that needs to change. And I say to people, fall in love with sleep. Treat it like a hobby you're passionate about. If there's something that you really love doing, I don't know, skiing, painting, anything, treat sleep like that. Invest time and money in it. Give it your attention, because we very often devalue sleep, particularly in our world, which is designed to keep us awake, really, isn't it? Everything keeps us awake. There's a box set, binging on this, scrolling that. It's all there to keep us awake and consuming and switched on the whole time. So it's quite a radical act to say, I'm not going to engage with that. I'm going to switch that off, and I'm going to prioritize my sleep and my health.
I love the thought about treating it like a hobby that you love, because I think most of us think of it as a necessity. It's not something we love necessarily, but some people do, but I think we just think of it as, get the minimum, because to your point, there's a gazillion other things we need to do. And just, get what you need to get by. But we don't really think about it like something we should invest time and money and priority to. So that's a good thought, good different thought. So let's touch on, I definitely don't want to end without giving some thought or some, room for discussion around the book that's about to come out. And so the reason I mean, obviously I wanted to be able to share the work you're working on, but also, so your book is called The Power Decade, How to Thrive After Menopause, and that comes out in April. But the thing that really hit me and resonated with me is the premise I read was The decade that takes us from our early 50s to early 60s is a time for us to take stock, to power ahead, to decide who we are, how we want to live, and how we want to face the future. And I thought that really, really ties into what I'm seeing and what I'm finding when I talk to women in the same age bracket, because it's, like I said earlier, it's such this phase of self-discovery and coming back to ourselves, and in a lot of ways getting so much stronger, even though, you might have been programmed to think we're going to get weaker, we're getting old, right? It's just so fascinating to me. So when I read that, I was like, wow, this really ties into, I think, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, what I've been going through. So I'm interested if you could share a few key topics, maybe give us a little sneak peek into some of the things that you really get into in there. What are we going to see if we pick up your book?
What we're going to see really is how the book came together for me, which was this sort of coalescing of three different things. One, as you say, this sense that we are very powerful. We are very strong post-menopause. If you think about it, since we were perhaps in our early teens or mid-teens, we have been tied to a very powerful cycle, a kind of endless tide back and forth of hormones and menstruation that has gone on for years. And when that ends, we find ourselves as very, very different people. And I was so interested by women I was talking to and seeing in the media who were finding this a time to be strong, as you say, to power up, hence the name, the Power Decade. But as a health coach and someone who's written about aging well for a long time, I know by the time we get to our mid-60s, we are statistically more likely to experience the chronic conditions of aging, be that diabetes, dementia, arthritis, etc. So there is that point in terms of our health that we have to focus on, and then learning about the power of our reproductive hormones, particularly estrogen, to do so much more than help us reproduce. That has been such a learning for me. And when I started to learn that what estrogen particularly does in the body and how it protects us, I was like, okay, these things are all linking up. This is a really interesting area. So in the book, there is a lot about how estrogen essentially kind of wraps us up in this warm, comforting blanket and looks after us and keeps our brains functioning and our bones strong and our hearts healthy and our cardiovascular system pumping and all these things. And then at menopause, it's like Mother Nature says, hey, I'm taking that away. You are on your own, honey. And that's when we have to really start looking after ourselves and really putting the focus and reprioritizing on ourselves. So that is really what the book is about. There are lots and lots of tips for all those things. I've talked to a lot of experts. There's a lot of emphasis on bone health, brain health, genitourinary health. That has been a really interesting learning curve, researching that and how important that is as we age. But it's really most of all about how we prioritize, how we have to now. We've lost the protection. We have to go after it ourselves and look after ourselves.
So it sounds fascinating. And obviously, with almost 20-ish years, I'll say, of work and research in this space, both from personal and then, beyond that, now you've been teaching and working in this space for a while. I'm curious. Obviously you wrote the book and there's a lot of wide ideas in there, but when you bring it home to yourself, I want to circle back to how we started. And you said, as you looked at your mom and your grandma and you thought about you and your children, your daughters, you wanted to do what you could to remove that same cycle, that pattern. Do you think you've been effective in impacting it? And if so, what do you think's been most effective?
Well, I hope I have been effective. I do the best I can. I always know, and I always say to people, there are no guarantees. We don't know what's coming down the path for any of us. But I certainly feel fitter and sharper and stronger, really, than at any point in my life. And I think the really important thing is consistency. It doesn't matter. It's not about taking the most expensive supplement, as we were saying, or doing extreme workouts. It's, can you be consistent? Can you be gently prioritizing your health each day? Even if that just means a 10-minute walk, then I think that's good. That's a benefit. I mean, for me, I think getting outside, I sound so crazy, but it was just something I just didn't do very much. I didn't really think about it. I probably did kind of a bit, but I didn't think about it actively. How much time do I spend outside? How much light, natural light do I get into my life? I didn't really think about. So just getting natural light every morning is something that I take very seriously now. And I know that helps my sleep, and it helps sort of sets me up for the day, because I get a chance to think about, what do I want today to be like? And how do I feel? And I can check in with myself, and that is really important too. So I think that, and also, as we were talking about, you getting fat, getting protein, thinking about my nutrition in a positive way rather than how little can I get away with eating and will this make me fat? Really flipping the script on that has been really important.
I think those are such great messages. Also, forget the dementia prevention. Just in general, those are such great messages for the girls, right? For your kids. I think we didn't grow up with those same messages. So I think we learn more, we do better. So that's a good thing. So as we kind of wrap up, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you think you'd like to share that comes up most often with your clients, or any really big tips or epiphanies that you'd like to put out there?
There are other things we haven't talked about, like stress reduction and the kind of toxicity of the environment that we're in. But I think one thing we need to think about is connection and socialization, and how we are around other people, because that's a really important part of this. And spending time with people is really, really important. Great for our brains. One of the best things we can do for our brains is to talk to a stranger. That's a really big workout for our brain.
Really?
Yeah, because our brain is thinking, who is this person? What do they want? Are they going to kill me? Are they going to eat me? How do I manage this? What am I going to say? How do I move in this situation? It's a really good workout for the brain. So just being around people,
that's a good
interacting with people, I think is a really good one. There's lots of brain training and quizzes and crosswords and all kinds of things that we can be doing, but anything that is new for our brain, anything that is a new experience, makes us feel so different and is giving our brain a workout at the same time. So I think not being afraid to try new things is really important.
Those are two really good ones. I will tell you, I think it was yesterday, the Harvard Business Review had published something about friendships and, relationships between women, and how they've obviously it was focused on professional work and corporate America and all that. But the gist of it was how much more we thrive with having really good community and really good relationships. And I think that's true. I mean, that's what you're saying. And I think it's true. I think it's more true than it's ever been, especially with the post-COVID environment and all of this. I think people finding a community and being able to really have relationships, whether virtually or in person, I think it makes a lot of difference. I really, really do. I think it makes a lot of difference. And your point about trying something new is really a good one for people to think about, because to your point, there are there's quizzes, there's games, there's all this stuff that get marketed now for keeping your brain sharp. But I think we are often challenged, or some more than others, with trying new things, especially, I'm going to say, at our age, right? Because it's a little bit scary. And what if we fail? What if we look silly? What if all the what ifs? But, one of the things that I try to put out there in lots of conversations is that we should be pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone, and we should be trying new things. And I never really thought of it from the brain perspective. So it's good to think about that a little bit more. But I get your point, because, anything like that, it's a unknown pattern of behavior. So our brain obviously is very engaged in it. So Yeah.
Yeah, it makes our brains work harder when it's something new. And that new thing could be walking a different route with the dog, or it could be taking off for a year and traveling around the world. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just something new that pushes us a little.
Yeah, switching it up a little bit. Well, this has been great, and I appreciate you sharing some of your knowledge with us. We will put all your links out there and let people know where to find you. I know you offer coaching with people on, what they can do to get more specific with them around their journey on aging well. And of course, we'll put the link to the book and all that out there. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me, Marianne. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review, as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.